The earth trembled beneath Emmeline Eastwood's feet as she clutched her lantern, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the mine walls that had, until moments ago, felt secure. It was 1878 in the small mining town of Yerington, Nevada, and she had made the fateful decision to deliver her father's forgotten lunch pail, a decision that would forever alter the course of her life. "Pa," she called out, her voice echoing down the darkened shaft. The Silver Creek mine had been producing well lately, bringing prosperity to their struggling town, but everyone knew the dangers that lurked beneath the surface. The subtle cracking sound above made her freeze. It happened in an instant. The timbers groaned, dust rained down, and before Emmeline could retreat, the world collapsed around her. Rocks crashed down, the lantern shattered, and darkness enveloped her completely as she fell, pain shooting through her leg before consciousness slipped away. Miles away, Lucas Marshall guided his horse along the dusty trail toward Yerington. At 26, he'd spent the last 8 years as a cowboy, working cattle drives across the Western Territories. His weather-beaten hat shaded blue eyes that had seen their share of hardship, and his lean frame carried the strength of a man who'd survived by his wits and skill. After years of wandering, he was returning to the place that had once been home, though there was little left for him there beyond memories. Lucas had no intention of staying long in Yerington. Just enough time to settle some business with the bank, visit his parents' graves, and move on. The mining town had grown since he'd last seen it. New buildings lined the main street, and the constant activity around the Silver Creek mine suggested prosperity had finally found its way to the once struggling settlement. He guided his horse toward the town's only hotel, but the commotion ahead gave him pause. A crowd had gathered near the mine entrance, and even from a distance, Lucas could see something was terribly wrong. Men rushed about with shovels and picks, women clustered in worried groups, and the mine foreman bellowed orders above the din. "What's happened?" Lucas asked, approaching an elderly man who stood at the edge of the chaos. "Cave in at the mine," the man replied, shaking his head. "Bad one, from what they're saying. Got at least a dozen men trapped, maybe more." Lucas dismounted, tying his horse to a hitching post. He'd never worked the mines himself, preferring the open sky to the darkness below, but he knew enough about cave-ins to understand the gravity of the situation. As he approached the crowd, he heard fragments of conversation: trapped miners, unstable tunnels, rescue efforts already underway. "They're saying Old Man Eastwood is among them," a woman whispered nearby, "and his daughter went in with his lunch not 20 minutes before it happened." Lucas felt a chill despite the Nevada heat. A woman in the mine, that wasn't common, and it made the situation all the more dire. He pushed through the crowd toward the mine entrance, where the foreman was organizing rescue teams. "We need experienced men," the foreman announced. "Anyone who's worked Silver Creek before. It's too dangerous otherwise." Lucas stepped forward. "I haven't worked this mine, but I've helped with cave-in rescues before, down in Arizona Territory 3 years back." The foreman eyed him skeptically. "Who are you?" "Lucas Marshall. I grew up here, been away for a while." Recognition flickered in the older man's eyes. "John Marshall's boy. Thought you'd left these parts for good." "I had," Lucas replied simply, "but I'm here now and I can help." The foreman hesitated only a moment before nodding. "We need every able body." The main shaft collapsed about 50 yards in. "We've got men working from the east tunnel trying to reach the trapped miners, but it's slow going. The girl Eastwood's daughter, she's believed to be in the North Passage. No one's attempting that route yet." "Why not?" Lucas asked. "Too unstable. We're focusing on where most of the men are trapped. We've only got so many hands." Lucas studied the crude map the foreman had sketched in the dirt. "I'll take the North Passage. Alone. "That's suicide, son." "Better than leaving her with no chance at all," Lucas replied. He'd seen enough death in his years riding the trails. The thought of a woman trapped alone in the darkness, perhaps injured, perhaps running out of air. "Give me a lantern and tell me what to look for." 10 minutes later, Lucas was entering the mine, a lantern in one hand, a canvas bag of tools slung over his shoulder. The air grew thick and stale as he ventured deeper, and the sounds from outside faded until all he could hear was his own breathing and the occasional ominous creaking of the timber supports. The main passage showed signs of recent activity: fresh footprints in the dust, discarded tools, a half-empty canteen. Lucas followed the foreman's directions, taking the fork that led to the north passage. The damage became more evident as he progressed: fallen rock, splintered timber, and a fine layer of dust that hung in the air like morning mist. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing eerily. "Can anyone hear me?" The silence that answered him was absolute. Lucas pressed on, stepping carefully over debris, ducking under a partially collapsed support beam. The air grew thinner, and he found himself taking deeper breaths. The passage narrowed, then widened again into what appeared to be a small chamber. And there, in the beam of his lantern, he saw a woman's boot protruding from beneath a pile of rubble. His heart raced as he rushed forward, setting the lantern on a nearby rock. "Hello, miss, can you hear me?" She didn't respond, but as he carefully removed the smaller rocks from around her, he could see the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but unconscious. The collapse had partially buried her. Her legs and torso were covered in debris, while her upper body had been somewhat protected by a fallen support beam that had created a small pocket. Lucas worked methodically, removing stones and dirt, careful not to trigger another collapse. The woman's face was pale beneath a layer of dust, her chestnut hair fallen loose from its pins. She was young, perhaps 20 or so, and even in this dire situation, he couldn't help but notice her beauty. "Miss," he said more loudly, gently touching her shoulder, "can you hear me?" "I'm here to help you." Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, revealing eyes the color of polished amber. Confusion gave way to fear as she became aware of her surroundings. "Don't move," Lucas cautioned as she tried to sit up. "You're trapped in a cave-in." "I need to get the rest of these rocks off you." "My father," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Is he?" "I don't know," Lucas admitted. "There are others trapped as well. Rescue teams are working to reach them." Relief and worry battled across her face. "You shouldn't be here alone. It's not stable." Despite her situation, she was concerned for his safety. The realization touched something in Lucas that had been dormant for a long time. "I'll be careful," he promised. "What's your name?" "Emmeline," she replied. "Emmeline Eastwood. I'm Lucas Marshall." "Now, I'm going to continue clearing these rocks. Tell me if anything hurts." Lucas resumed his work, carefully removing the debris that trapped her lower body. Some of the rocks were larger than he'd anticipated, requiring all his strength to move. The skin on his hands began to wear away as he worked, but he barely noticed the pain. "You're bleeding," Emmeline observed, watching his hands. "It's nothing," he assured her. "Just a few scratches." But as he worked, the scratches deepened into cuts, and soon his hands were slick with blood. Still, he continued, determined to free her before the air grew too thin, or the remaining supports gave way. After what seemed like hours, he'd cleared enough debris to assess her injuries. Her right ankle was swollen and possibly broken, and she had cuts and bruises along her legs, but otherwise seemed remarkably intact. "Can you move your legs?" he asked. She winced as she tried. "The right one hurts terribly, but I can feel both of them." "That's good," Lucas said, relieved. A back injury would have complicated their escape immeasurably. I'm going to try to free your legs now. This might hurt." Emmeline nodded, biting her lip as Lucas carefully lifted the last large rock pinning her right leg. She cried out in pain, but when the rock was removed, both her legs were free. "I don't think I can walk," she said, attempting to sit up with his help. "That's all right," Lucas replied, wiping his bloodied hands on his trousers. "I'll carry you. The journey back would be treacherous." The passage had continued to deteriorate while he worked, and Lucas knew they had little time before another collapse might occur. He gathered Emmeline in his arms, her slight weight belying the strength he sensed in her. She looped her arms around his neck, and he could feel her trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, her face close to his. "For coming for me." Lucas nodded, unable to articulate the strange protectiveness he felt toward this woman he'd just met. Instead, he focused on navigating the dangerous passage, one careful step at a time. The lantern swung from his fingers, casting wild shadows on the walls around them. They were halfway back to the main shaft when they heard a low, ominous rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Dust sifted down from above, and the timbers creaked dangerously. "We need to move faster," Lucas said, quickening his pace despite the risk. Emmeline clung tighter to him, her face buried against his shoulder as he maneuvered through the increasingly unstable passage. The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly rocks began to fall around them. Lucas lunged forward, shielding Emmeline with his body as a section of the ceiling came down behind them. The lantern smashed against the ground, plunging them into complete darkness. For a terrible moment, they lay still in the pitch black, the sound of falling rock and creaking timber all around them. When the noise subsided, Lucas became acutely aware of Emmeline's heart beating rapidly against his chest, her breath warm against his neck. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice sounding strange in the absolute darkness. "No," she replied, her voice steadier than he expected. "Are you?" "I'm fine." He shifted carefully, mindful of her injured ankle. "But we've lost our light, and I think the passage behind us is completely blocked now. What do we do?" Lucas considered their options. "We keep moving forward. The main shaft can't be far now, and there will be others with lanterns." In the darkness, he helped Emmeline to her feet, allowing her to lean heavily on him to avoid putting weight on her injured ankle. Together, they began to move slowly forward, Lucas feeling his way along the wall, Emmeline hobbling beside him, her arm around his waist, his arm supporting her shoulders. They moved in silence for what seemed an eternity, the darkness absolute, the air growing thicker with dust and increasingly hard to breathe. Lucas found himself wondering about the woman beside him. Who was she beyond the daughter of a miner? What had brought her into the mine on this particular day? Would he have met her if circumstances had been different? "Tell me about yourself," he said, partly to distract her from their dire situation, partly out of genuine curiosity. "Now?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "Why not?" "It helps pass the time." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've lived in Yerington all my life. My mother died when I was 12, so it's been just my father and me since then. I help run the boarding house on Pine Street." "I know the place," Lucas said. "Mrs. Henderson's old house." "Yes, she left it to my father when she passed. We converted it." Emmeline stumbled slightly, and Lucas tightened his grip on her. "What about you? You said you grew up here, but I don't recall a Lucas Marshall. I left when I was 18. My parents died of fever within months of each other, and there was nothing keeping me here. I've been working cattle drives, mostly. Texas, Arizona, up to Montana. And now you're back." "Just passing through," he said, though the words felt hollow now. "Or I was, until I heard about the cave-in." They fell silent again, conserving their breath in the increasingly stale air. Lucas felt his way forward, one hand on the wall, the other holding Emmeline steady. Her strength impressed him. Many would have succumbed to panic in their situation, but she remained calm, determined. "Look," she suddenly whispered. "Do you see that?" At first, Lucas saw nothing but darkness, but then he realized there was the faintest suggestion of light ahead, not sunshine, but perhaps another lantern. Hope surged through him. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing down the passage. "We're here." "Hello." The light grew stronger, and then they heard voices calling back. Minutes later, they were blinking in the glow of multiple lanterns as rescue workers reached them. The men looked shocked at the sight of them, covered in dust and blood, Emmeline barely able to stand, Lucas supporting her with arms that trembled from exertion. "Marshal," one of the men said in disbelief. "How did you get through? The North Passage collapsed completely about 20 minutes ago." "We were already past that point," Lucas explained, allowing two of the men to take Emmeline from him. He immediately missed her warmth against his side. "How are the others?" "The men who were trapped. Most got out," the man replied grimly. "We lost 3, including Jacob Eastwood." Lucas turned to Emmeline, who had gone deathly pale at the words. "My father," she whispered, her voice breaking. The men looked away, uncomfortable with her grief. "I'm sorry, Miss Eastwood. He was in the deepest part of the East Tunnel when it collapsed. There was no chance." Emmeline swayed, and Lucas stepped forward, catching her before she could fall. She didn't cry out or wail as many might have. Instead, she seemed to fold inward, grief etching itself into every line of her body. Lucas held her gently, feeling her shoulders shake with silent sobs. "Let's get you both out of here," one of the rescue workers said softly. "Doctors waiting topside." The journey to the surface seemed both endless and too short. Lucas refused to relinquish Emmeline to the other men, carrying her himself despite his exhaustion and bleeding hands. She didn't protest, her face buried against his shoulder, her body still trembling with shock and grief. When they finally emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, a cheer went up from the crowd gathered around the mine entrance. The sound faded quickly as they realized the state of the 2 survivors, and as word spread about those who wouldn't be coming out. The town doctor pushed through the crowd, directing Lucas to bring Emmeline to a makeshift treatment area that had been set up nearby. As he laid her gently on a cot, Lucas was suddenly aware of how filthy and bloody they both were, how his entire body ached, how the fresh air made him dizzy after hours in the suffocating mine. "Your hands need attention," the doctor said to Lucas, eyeing the raw, bloody mess that his palms had become. "Sit down before you fall down, young man." Lucas sank onto a stool beside Emmeline's cot, unwilling to move further away from her. The doctor examined her first, confirming that her ankle was indeed broken and splinting it efficiently. He cleaned the cuts on her face and arms, gave her something for the pain, and then turned his attention to Lucas. "You did quite a number on yourself," the doctor commented, cleaning Lucas's torn hands. "These will be painful for a while. You're lucky there's no serious damage to the tendons." Lucas barely felt the sting of the antiseptic or the pressure of the bandages. His attention remained fixed on Emmeline, whose eyes had closed, whether from exhaustion or the effect of the medicine, he couldn't tell. "Will she be all right?" he asked the doctor quietly. "Physically, yes. The ankle will heal in time. The rest." The doctor glanced at Emmeline's pale face. "Losing her father, that's going to be harder to recover from. She has no other family as far as I know." The realization hit Lucas with unexpected force. Emmeline was alone now, just as he had been at 18, but he'd been a man able to make his own way. A single woman in a mining town with no family to protect her, her future suddenly seemed precarious. "Where will she go?" Lucas asked. "I imagine she'll continue running the boarding house," the doctor replied. It's hers now, after all. Whether she can manage it alone, that's another question. Later that evening, after the doctor had reluctantly allowed Lucas to leave with strict instructions to rest and keep his hands clean, he found himself standing outside the small clapboard house where Emmeline had been taken. Her closest neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Parker, had insisted on bringing her home and looking after her. Lucas hesitated at the front gate, uncertain of his welcome. He'd saved Emmeline's life, yes, but he was still essentially a stranger to her, and she was grieving. Perhaps his presence would only be an intrusion. As he turned to leave, the door opened and Mrs. Parker appeared on the porch. "Mr. Marshall, I thought I saw someone out here." "Madam," Lucas acknowledged, removing his hat. "I just wanted to check on Miss Eastwood, but it's late and I don't want to disturb her." "Nonsense, Mrs. Parker said firmly. "She's been asking for you. Come in." Surprised, Lucas followed the older woman into the modest house. It was simply but comfortably furnished, with faded curtains at the windows and a braided rug on the floor. Mrs. Parker led him to a small bedroom off the main living area. Emmeline was propped up on pillows, her splinted ankle elevated, her hair neatly braided over one shoulder. She looked small and vulnerable in the large bed, but her eyes were clear when they met his. "Mr. Marshall," she said softly, "I was beginning to think you'd left town already." "The doctor wouldn't let me go until he was satisfied I wouldn't drop dead in the street," Lucas replied, attempting humor. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was buried alive and then lost my father on the same day," she answered with brutal honesty. "But I'm alive thanks to you, Mrs. Parker cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to talk. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything, Emmeline." When they were alone, Lucas awkwardly took a seat in the chair beside the bed, his bandaged hands resting on his knees. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. "I never had the chance to meet him, but the men at the mine spoke highly of him." "He was a good man," Emmeline said, her voice steady though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He worked that mine for 15 years, always saying the big strike was just around the corner. And now—" She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "Now you're alone," Lucas finished for her. "I know something about that. It's not easy." "No, it isn't," she agreed. "But I have the boarding house. It isn't much, but it's a living. Can you manage it with your ankle?" "I'll have to," she said simply. "Mrs. Parker can help for a few days, but she has her own concerns. I'll hire someone for the heavier work until I can get around better." Lucas nodded, admiring her practical approach even in her grief. Many women would have collapsed under the weight of such circumstances, but Emmeline Eastwood clearly possessed a rare resilience. "I could help," he offered before fully considering the implications. "I mean, until your ankle heals. I'm handy enough and I don't have pressing business elsewhere." Emmeline studied him, her amber eyes thoughtful. "You said you were just passing through." "I was," he acknowledged, "but plans can change." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Lucas considered the question. Why indeed? He'd spent 8 years avoiding attachments, moving on whenever a place or people began to feel too familiar. Yet here he was, offering to stay and help a woman he barely knew. "Maybe because I know what it's like to face the world alone," he said finally. "Or maybe because after pulling you out of that mine, I'd like to make sure you're truly all right before I move on." A small smile curved her lips, the first he'd seen. "That's very kind, Mr. Marshall." "Lucas," he corrected. "After today, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Lucas," she repeated, and something about the way she said his name made his heart beat faster. "In that case, you must call me Emmeline." "Emmeline," he said, testing the name. It suited her, elegant yet strong. "So do you accept my offer of help?" She hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I can't pay much," she warned. "Room and board would be sufficient," he said. I've been sleeping under the stars for so long that a real bed will seem like luxury." "Then yes," she decided. "I accept your offer, Lucas, thank you." The following morning, Lucas moved his few belongings from the hotel to the small room at the back of the boarding house that Emmeline had allocated to him. The house itself was larger than he'd remembered, 2 stories with 8 guest rooms, a common dining area, and a cozy sitting room. Currently, 4 of the rooms were occupied by long-term boarders, all men who worked either at the mine or the sawmill outside town. Emmeline, despite the doctor's orders to rest, insisted on instructing Lucas in the daily operations of the house from her position on the sofa in the sitting room. She kept meticulous records in a ledger: who had paid, who owed, what supplies were needed, and what repairs were pending. "Usually I serve breakfast at 7 and supper at 6, she explained. "The men get their own midday meals. Most work different shifts, so they're not all here at once, which makes it manageable." "And you do all this alone?" Lucas asked, impressed by the scope of her responsibilities. "I hire Molly Jenkins to help with the cleaning twice a week, and occasionally her brother chops wood and does heavier repairs," Emmeline replied. "But yes, most of it falls to me. It has since my father went back to mining full-time 2 years ago. That's a lot of responsibility for one person." She shrugged. "It keeps me busy, and I prefer being my own mistress to the alternatives." Lucas understood the sentiment. There weren't many options for single women in small western towns, teaching if they had the education, working in a shop or restaurant, marriage, of course. But all meant being under someone else's authority. With Emmeline's guidance, Lucas took over the more physical aspects of running the boarding house: chopping wood, making repairs, hauling water, and tending to the small vegetable garden behind the house. His hands healed quickly, though the doctor warned he would always bear the scars of his rescue effort. The boarders, initially skeptical of the stranger in their midst, gradually accepted Lucas's presence, particularly when they realized the quality of meals improved with his help. Though not an accomplished cook, Lucas had learned to prepare decent meals during his years on cattle drives, and he took over much of the kitchen work to allow Emmeline to rest her ankle. In the evenings, after the boarders had retired or gone out to enjoy the town's limited entertainment options, Lucas and Emmeline often sat in the kitchen or on the small back porch, talking as they completed the day's final tasks. He told her about his travels: the vast open plains of Texas, the majestic mountains of Montana, the stark beauty of the Arizona desert. She shared stories of Yerington's growth from a tiny settlement to a proper town, and memories of her mother, who had taught her to read and write and manage a household. "She would have liked you," Emmeline said one evening as Lucas mended a broken chair beside the kitchen stove. "She always said you could judge a man by how he works with his hands." Lucas glanced up from his task, a smile tugging at his lips. "And how would I be judged?" "Favorably," Emmeline replied, a blush coloring her cheeks as she turned her attention back to the socks she was darning. "Very favorably." 2 weeks after the mine accident, the town held a memorial service for the 3 men who had perished. Lucas stood beside Emmeline as she accepted condolences from what seemed like the entire population of Yerington. She remained composed throughout, though Lucas could see the effort it cost her. Only when they returned to the boarding house did she allow herself to weep, and Lucas found himself holding her as she finally released her grief. "I'm sorry," she said afterward, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "I didn't mean to burden you with this." "It's no burden," Lucas assured her. "Grief isn't meant to be carried alone." She looked up at him, her eyes still bright with tears. "Is that why you left Yerington when your parents died? Because you had no one to share the burden with?" The question caught him off guard. He had never really examined his reasons for leaving so precipitously. "Perhaps," he admitted, "or maybe I just couldn't bear to stay in a place where everything reminded me of what I'd lost." "And now," she asked softly, "what does Yerington remind you of now?" He held her gaze, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how her hand rested lightly on his arm, how the lamplight cast a warm glow on her skin. "Now it reminds me of what I might find if I chose to stay." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibility. Then Emmeline stepped back, composure returning though her eyes remained soft. "It's late," she said. "We should both get some rest." Lucas nodded, understanding her caution. She was still vulnerable, still grieving. And he was still, in many ways, a drifter who had made no firm commitment to Yerington or to her. As the weeks passed, Emmeline's ankle healed, and she gradually resumed her normal activities, though Lucas continued to help with the boarding house. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side, their initial awkwardness replaced by comfortable familiarity. Lucas found himself noticing small things about her, the way she hummed under her breath when she was content, how she always had a kind word for everyone regardless of their station, the determined set of her jaw when she tackled a difficult task. The boarders began to treat them as a unit, coming to either of them with requests or concerns, and even Mrs. Parker, who visited regularly, seemed to assume Lucas's presence was a permanent arrangement. Neither Lucas nor Emmeline corrected these assumptions, though they had not discussed his plans beyond his initial offer to help until she was recovered. In truth, Lucas found himself reluctant to think about leaving. For the first time since his parents' deaths, he felt rooted, connected to a place and its people. He found satisfaction in the simple routines of the boarding house, in the gradual improvements he made to the property, and most of all, in Emmeline's company. One evening in early June, nearly a month after the mine accident, Lucas returned from the mercantile to find Emmeline sitting on the front porch, a letter in her hand and a troubled expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down the supplies he'd purchased. "It's from the mine owner," she replied, handing him the letter. "They're offering compensation for my father's death. It's quite generous, actually." Lucas scanned the letter. The sum offered was indeed substantial enough to pay off any remaining debt on the boarding house and provide a comfortable cushion besides. "That's good news, isn't it?" he asked, returning the letter. "It is," she agreed, "but it makes me wonder what I should do now. The boarding house was always meant to be temporary, a way to support ourselves until Pa's investments in the mine paid off. Now you have options," Lucas finished for her. She nodded. "I could sell the boarding house, move to Sacramento or even San Francisco. I could study, perhaps become a teacher, or I could stay here, expand the business, make it something more than it is." "What do you want to do?" Lucas asked, sitting beside her on the porch step. Emmeline was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "A month ago, I would have said I wanted to leave Yerington, see more of the world, but now." "Now," Lucas prompted when she trailed off. She turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. "Now I'm not sure I want to leave at all. There are reasons to stay that I hadn't considered before." Lucas's heart quickened at her words and the way she looked at him, as though he might be one of those reasons. "Yerington's not such a bad place to put down roots," he said carefully. "No, it isn't," she agreed. "But what about you, Lucas? You've been helping me for weeks, but we've never discussed what comes next for you. Will you move on now that I'm recovered?" It was the question he'd been avoiding, even in his own thoughts. The open road had been his home for so long that the prospect of staying in one place, of committing to a life here, was both appealing and terrifying. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to find out if it could become home." "And Yerington?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could it become home for you?" Lucas really looked at her, and saw more than just the woman he'd rescued from the mine. He saw her courage in facing adversity, her kindness to strangers, her quiet determination to forge her own path. And he saw a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine until now. "It could," he said softly, "with the right reason to stay." Emmeline held his gaze, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "And if I asked you to stay, to help me build something here, are you asking?" Lucas countered, his heart hammering in his chest. "I'm asking," she confirmed. "Not because I need help running the boarding house, but because I've come to care for you, Lucas. More than I thought possible in such a short time." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Lucas reached for her hand, his scarred palm cradling her smaller one. "I've spent 8 years wandering," he said, "never staying long enough to form attachments, always looking to the next horizon. But these past weeks with you have felt more like home than anywhere I've been since my parents died." Emmeline's fingers tightened around his. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Lucas leaned forward and kissed her softly. It was a tentative kiss at first, a question rather than a declaration. But when Emmeline responded, moving closer and sliding her free hand to the nape of his neck, it deepened into something more, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "That's definitely a yes," he murmured, and was rewarded with her delighted laugh. "Then we should make plans," she said, her eyes bright with happiness and possibility. "For the boarding house for us." Over the following weeks, those plans began to take shape. With the compensation from the mine, Emmeline paid off the mortgage on the boarding house and set aside funds for improvements. Lucas, drawing on skills he'd learned during his travels, expanded the dining room and added 2 more guest rooms. They hired Molly Jenkins full-time to help with the cleaning and cooking, allowing Emmeline to focus on the business aspects and Lucas to handle maintenance and future expansions. As summer turned to autumn, their relationship deepened. They spent their days working side by side, their evenings planning for the future. The boarding house began to attract more than just miners and mill workers. Travelers passing through Yerington discovered it was a comfortable, welcoming establishment, and word spread. One crisp October evening, Lucas took Emmeline for a ride outside town, to a small plateau overlooking the valley. The aspen trees were ablaze with golden leaves, and the distant mountains wore the first dusting of snow on their peaks. "I have something to show you," Lucas said, helping her down from her horse. He led her to the edge of the plateau, where the view stretched for miles in every direction. "It's beautiful," Emmeline breathed, taking in the panorama. "I bought this land yesterday," Lucas said quietly. 10 acres, including this spot." Emmeline turned to him in surprise. "You bought land, but why? We've been talking about expanding the boarding house in town." "We have," he agreed. "And we will, but I thought. That is, I hoped." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. He'd never been good with words, preferring action to declaration. But some things needed to be said. "Emmeline," he began again, taking her hands in his. "When I pulled you from that mine, I had no idea I was also finding a future I never knew I wanted. These past months with you have shown me what it means to belong somewhere, to someone. I don't want to just help you run the boarding house. I want to build a life with you here on this land, in that house." He gestured to a clearing among the trees. "I want to marry you if you'll have me." Emmeline's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Lucas Marshall, are you proposing to me on land you bought without telling me?" "I am," he admitted a bit sheepishly. "Though I'd planned a more eloquent speech," she laughed, the sound carrying across the plateau. "It was perfect," she assured him, stepping closer. "And yes, I'll marry you, though I think we should keep the boarding house too." "We'll keep the boarding house," Lucas agreed, drawing her into his arms, "and build our home here. And maybe someday, a few little cabins for visitors who want more privacy than the boarding house offers." "A resort," Emmeline mused, warming to the idea. "For people from the cities who want to experience the real West." "Exactly," Lucas said, pleased she understood his vision so quickly. "We can offer guided rides into the mountains, fishing expeditions, even hunting in season." "It's a wonderful plan," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Our plan." They were married in November, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Yerington. Mrs. Parker stood up for Emmeline, and one of the long-term boarders, a former Texas Ranger named Hank, served as Lucas's best man. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, which spilled from the church to the boarding house and into the street between. "Mrs. Marshall," Lucas whispered as they shared their first dance together. "How does it sound?" "Like the beginning of a very good story," Emmeline replied, her amber eyes bright with happiness. Winter came early that year, with heavy snows that kept them busy at the boarding house, which remained full despite the harsh weather. They worked on plans for their new home during the long evenings, Lucas sketching layouts while Emmeline made lists of furnishings and supplies they would need. They broke ground on their homestead in early spring, as soon as the snow had melted enough to allow construction. Lucas hired several men from town to help with the building, but he insisted on doing much of the work himself, especially the interior finishings, that he wanted to be just right for Emmeline. By midsummer, the house was taking shape, a solid two-story structure of local stone and timber, with wide windows to capture the magnificent views and a deep porch that wrapped around three sides. Emmeline planted a garden nearby, envisioning how it would look in years to come, with fruit trees and berry bushes surrounding beds of vegetables and flowers. "It's going to be beautiful," Lucas said, finding her kneeling among newly planted rose bushes one afternoon, "just like its mistress." Emmeline smiled up at him, pushing a strand of hair from her face with a dirt-smudged hand. "It already is beautiful. I can hardly believe it's ours." They moved into the house in late August, though it wasn't fully completed. "We'll finish it together, bit by bit," Lucas said as he carried Emmeline across the threshold. "Just like we'll build our life together." With the boarding house running smoothly under Molly's daily management and occasional oversight from Emmeline, they were able to focus on developing their new property. They added a small stable for horses, cleared riding trails through the surrounding forest, and began work on the first of several guest cabins. Word of their enterprise spread, and by the following spring, they had their first bookings, a family from San Francisco seeking respite from city life, and a writer from New York who wanted to experience the authentic West. Both left pleased with their stay, promising to recommend the Marshall retreat to friends and acquaintances. It was around this time that Emmeline discovered she was expecting their first child. Lucas's joy at the news was boundless. He swept her into his arms and spun her around the kitchen until she laughingly protested. "A child," he said in wonder, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child." "The first of several, I hope," Emmeline replied, covering his hand with hers. "I always wanted a large family." "As many as you want," Lucas promised, kissing her tenderly. "This house was built for children, to fill it with laughter." Their son, William Jacob Marshall, was born on a crisp November day in 1880, almost exactly a year after their wedding. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined expression, and both parents were completely besotted with him from the first moment. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, cradling his newborn son while Emmeline rested. "Absolutely perfect." Life settled into a new rhythm with William's arrival. Emmeline divided her time between caring for their son, managing the boarding house books, and helping with the retreat guests. Lucas continued to expand their property, adding 2 more guest cabins and purchasing additional horses for the increasingly popular trail rides he led into the surrounding mountains. As William grew from infant to toddler to an active little boy, the Marshall Retreat gained a reputation as one of the finest accommodations in Nevada. They hired additional staff, a cook, 2 maids, and a young man to help with the horses and guide visitors on fishing expeditions. The boarding house in town remained successful as well, catering primarily to long-term residents and travelers passing through on business rather than pleasure. In the spring of 1883, their family expanded again with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose. Where William was boisterous and adventurous, Elizabeth was thoughtful and observant, watching the world with her mother's amber eyes before deciding whether to participate. "She's going to be the one who keeps us all in line," Lucas predicted as he watched 3-year-old William attempting to entertain his baby sister with increasingly elaborate antics, while Elizabeth regarded him with what could only be described as tolerant amusement. Just like her mother. Emmeline teased, leaning against her husband's shoulder as they sat on the porch swing, enjoying a rare quiet moment together. "Exactly like her mother," Lucas agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of Emmeline's head. "Thank God for that." The years passed in a blend of hard work and profound happiness. The Marshall Retreat expanded to include a main lodge where guests could gather for meals and entertainment, and the guest cabins increased to 8, each positioned to offer privacy and spectacular views. They added activities for visitors: archery, horseshoes, even a small lake stocked with trout for those who preferred fishing without venturing too far. William and Elizabeth were joined by another brother, Samuel, in 1885, and the 3 children grew up immersed in both the family businesses, learning from an early age about hospitality, hard work, and the rewards of creating something lasting. In 1888, 10 years after the cave-in that had brought them together, Lucas and Emmeline stood on the plateau where he had proposed, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. Their children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Emmeline asked, leaning into Lucas's embrace. "That day when you dug me out of the mine, did you ever think we'd be here like this?" Lucas looked around at the thriving retreat that had grown from a mere idea, at their beautiful children, and finally at the woman in his arms, still as lovely as the day he'd first seen her, perhaps more so for the happiness that radiated from her. "No," he admitted, brushing a kiss against her temple. "I couldn't have imagined this. I was just a drifter passing through with nothing to offer but bloody hands and a stubborn refusal to let you die in that mine." "Those bloody hands built all this," Emmeline said softly, turning in his embrace to face him. "And that stubborn refusal gave us a chance at a life together. I'd say that was quite a lot to offer." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, the same hands that had once bled as he dug through rock and debris to reach her. The scars had faded over the years, but they remained, a permanent reminder of the day that had changed everything. "I love you, Emmeline Marshall," he said simply. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "And I love you," she replied, her amber eyes bright with emotion. "My rescuer, my partner, my home." As the last light of day gilded the landscape around them, Lucas kissed his wife, surrounded by the life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings, a cave-in, a rescue, and the healing power of love that had transformed a drifter and a small-town woman into something remarkable. In that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, they were exactly where they were meant to be together, in the home they had created, in the life they had chosen, bound by a love that had begun in darkness but would continue, always in light.